Bet you thought I was gone. I'm back with another cursed project. If you haven't seen the first episode, I basically took Super Mario World and I molded it into a 3D game in a modern game engine. Turns out, that was an extremely fun and successful project. You all went absolutely nuts for it. While I was working on episode 1, I stumbled upon some more voxel art for A Link to the Past. And at that point I already knew that I had to do it for that game as well. I guess taking old legends and reimagining them in a new way is just kind of what I do now. So of course I'm going to attempt to remake A Link to the Past in Unity. But, and this has to be mentioned, the amount of support and interest that I got releasing a video when I had 35 subscribers was absolutely overwhelming. I did not expect this. Game dev on YouTube is actually quite popular, so it's really nice to feel like I can carve out my little corner over here and people actually want to see it. I was able to stay motivated because of that response. And then I was able to make this gem. It's kind of cursed. But that's just the magic. So just like the last project, this one's going to start with our main voxel. I know a lot of people like putting a bunch of logic into their character controller and getting that stuff all fixed up first, but for me I just kind of like seeing what the main character is going to look like. Luckily I had an idea of what Link was going to look like. I've played A Link to the Past so many times and I've seen other voxels of this online. That being said, this was still really hard and it makes me kind of nervous for what the next project is going to be when I possibly decide to do a less popular game and I have no idea what the art's going to look like and I'll have no idea how to build it, but that's a problem for later. Maybe even this series will pique some interest from viewers or from someone who would like to give me some guidance or some help with the art for the next project. Or maybe not, because we all know that some of the best content in these videos is watching me fumble through this stuff. I'm not sure if it was practice or something else at this point, but I think Link was a little bit easier to make than Mario. Mario had a lot of different animations, and Link just kind of walks around in this game, and there is a sword swing as well, and some other small things, but yeah. Also, this process was a little more efficient as well, because I knew that I was not going to try to do some kind of crazy animation rig or anything with a character like this. It's just going to be frames, and we're not going to create Nightmare Fuel again. Although Nightmare Fuel can be pretty funny, I'll just give it some time. And just like that, millions of memories reimagined and brought back to life. So, at least at the beginning this was pretty similar. I got a few different frames in Magic of Voxel for Link, and then I brought him into Unity immediately. I decided to take the Mario character controller and strip it down to its basics and then reuse that for Link. I really like the way that the camera works with those, and the base walking around is going to work exactly the same. Everything else is going to be completely different, but that smooth base is what we're going for. And then immediately upon testing it, this happened. Unity, why are you like this? Eventually I will use Unity's in-house gravity for some project, but because of how cursed it is, I'm just going to use simple script gravity. As you can see, I did some of the level building beforehand, but before I decided to get into the meat of that, I decided to finish off some of the voxels. The sword and shield were extremely easy. It took me a couple minutes. The next part was... Yeah, I wasn't super stoked how this guy turned out. It was so weird to build him. Armor's weird. I didn't know how big to make him. I didn't know how to make him like voxel muscular. I don't know. The end result looked okay, and he kind of does look like the knight in the actual game, just maybe not the same proportions, but it's fine. He does what he needs to do. Like, we gotta move. I spent so much time level building after that initial setup, and it's been so much more work because I don't actually know where to end, whereas with an encapsulated level, I can just finish it off after one and that's it, but this is kind of just open. I got a texture pack from this fellow, whose name I do not know how to pronounce, so thank you so much. I decided to go with Ocarina of Time textures, as we sort of went with Mario 64 textures for the last one. Also, yeah, I know, I'm not using Blender. I don't really have the luxury of time to learn how to use Blender right now, so I'm pretty much committed to pushing these prototype tools like UModeler to its absolute max. And sometimes it really felt like I had to do exactly that. I wish that there was smooth edges and stuff, but it is what it is. Yeah, and as I already showed, there's a ton more level building that I got footage of, but this video should not be an hour long of mostly that, so it magically happened in the background. Especially this giant lake in the southeast corner that has all these islands and winding canals everywhere. This was built with zero pain at all. Great job, UModeler. You're an awesome tool for how much money you cost. No pain. Extremely easy. So when I needed a break from all of that great level building, I decided to do the Hearts UI. Mostly because the idea of leaving all of the UI till the end again was just terrible. I definitely never used ChatGPT to help with any of it either. Yeah, jokes aside, don't use ChatGPT to write your code. Use it to debug your code. Because if you ask it to write a ton of code, it's not going to make any sense. But that could be a good video idea. So this ended up being a little overcomplicated, but basically what we do is we draw all the hearts on screen initially, and then as the number of health is updated, we just redraw the hearts each time.
You done messed up, Aaron!
All of the hearts are initially drawn based on the max amount of health, and then as that number updates in the game, either subtracting or adding, it redraws them and updates it visually. And the way the game knows whether to draw a full, half, or empty heart is magic. Just kidding, it's boring math. I started working on Link's house next. I was extremely lucky to find this 3D make of Kakariko Village. Huge shout out to Dyson here. This thing is probably one of, if not the best 3D snippets of an old game I've ever seen. So I did my best at eye-copying one of those models from that village, but I didn't want to change too much because they're honestly pretty close to perfect. I ended up spending a good amount of time on it anyways though, because the initial version that I copied wasn't nearly as detailed, and I ended up just having to add the detail myself afterwards. I know it's not super big or anything, but as of now this is the largest voxel I've done to date. And I will say, it's not too much different. Voxels are extremely scalable in terms of what you want to do. The only major difference with something like a house like this is you have the freedom to add some more detail. At the end of the day, if you can make some small character out of a bunch of cubes, you can probably make a square house out of a bunch of cubes. I know this seems like extremely tedious work, and a lot of the time it is. I honestly don't know what drives me to do these things cube by cube and paint every piece myself. Maybe it's just because it feels that much better when it's finally done. And this one felt exceptionally good. I was really happy with how it turned out. On his own, this Link does not do nearly as much as Mario. He basically moves and attacks with his sword, and then it's his tools that he accumulates that give him more interesting options. But first I was going to focus on the basics. There's really only one animation to make, and that's the sword swing. The problem is that Link's weapon is not always attached to his main model, because he doesn't always have his sword out. In the game it actually only appears when you enter that attack animation, so the sword is a separate voxel. So I had to figure out how to kind of play two animations at once. Link's animation is frame animation with a voxel plugin, but since the sword is not a part of him and his main voxel model, I had to attach it to him in Unity, so when that thing's animating, it's not frames. So it's kind of weird, but the sword needs to be a child object of Link, so it can do specific things action-wise. There's probably a better way to do this. I don't know. It looks kind of clunky. It does work though, and it took a lot of fine-tuning, as you can kind of see here. I was just slightly moving the sword, working on different keyframes and stuff, and in the end it works and the collision is good. It just looks a little weird, but I'm okay with it for now. I'll probably go back and maybe work on some of the keyframes after. Went back and I made the singular tree that appears 3 million times in this game. Don't have too much else to say about it. It's a round tree, and I'm sure you'll be quite familiar with it if you've played A Link to the Past. At some point around here too, I made some rocks and some fence voxels, but there's just so much art, and I actually can't find the videos of that. They're not super interesting though. Then was my attempt at, I think it's called officially Mysterious Statue. I tried my best to get it to be as close as possible to the original. And once again, for some reason, I don't have footage of finishing this. I guess at some point during the sea of voxel creation, I started to go slowly insane and I just forgot to record things. This is what it looks like finished though. It's kind of jank, but you know, it is what it is. There's a ton of level building that went in around here. My biggest question with this video was how much of this level building should I show? I don't know how interesting it is, and I never really had a point where I knew I would stop. I might just have to rely on comments and feedback or something to get a good feel if people want to see a ton of that. And if they do, I can maybe put it in the next video or make another series, because there's definitely a lot of footage of level building for this. Another large question mark for this project was water. There's a ton of lakes and puddles in A Link to the Past, and I had to figure out how to bring it into this in the same capacity. On one hand, what this meant was I needed some kind of moving material and texture that would represent water in this style of graphics. And then on the other hand, this water needed to be some kind of volume or trigger that Link could pass through that would cause him to start swimming. Only if the water is deep. If the water is shallow, he just walks through it like normal. And as you probably guessed, I found just that. This is low poly water from the Unity Asset Store, so props to this creator. This is exactly what I need, and it's super lightweight and it's really easy to implement. You're probably wondering about swimming. Well, that's one of those things that I decided to save for part 2, or maybe not save, but it just had to wait so I could get this video out. Also that, and that, and that, and that, and that, and all of that stuff, a lot of it. And here's the first attempt I had at the sword damaging enemies. Completely nothing, so made a code change like the amazing programmer I am, and I obviously got it on the second try. Check this out. That's correct, right? Now, this enemy AI is pretty similar to what I had last time. They just patrol around on a nav mesh, except this time, if Link gets within a certain radius of them, they will turn towards him and start chasing. And believe it or not, the knights in this game, that's pretty much all they do. They see Link, they're just gonna run into you over and over again until you die. They kind of just hold their swords in front of and just stab you and bounce back and forth. He doesn't have a sword yet, but this kind of behavior right here that you see is mostly what I want. I have to do some tweaking, not what he's doing right now. So I made some changes to the nav mesh to make those final tweaks, you know, make it refine, make it feel good, and then, yeah. I should never program enemies in video games. So after I uncursed the AI pathing, I wanted to make sure that the basic combat was in a good feeling spot. First, Link was going to need his shield, and that shield was going to have to be able to block incoming damage. Damage dealt and damage taken in A Link to the Past result in these knockbacks and bounces that sort of make up the basics of how combat works in this game. Because it's that simple, you want something that feels extremely tight. I still have to add a ton of animations and tweak the speeds and stuff like that, but this combat is a timing thing. You want to be able to strike and knock them back, but not be open to their strikes. I know it doesn't look like much here, but it's kind of what's happening. One of the things that I was thinking of the entire time while making this was getting that old style pixel arty JRPG-y inside-outside building transitions, you know, where in games like Final Fantasy or Octopath, you enter a building, the inside lights up, all of the outside turns completely black, so it's really focused on that building you're in. It took me so long to figure this out in Unity and 3D, with how to choose which objects to fade out, how to get the entire outside to just turn black, how to transition this between inside of a building and outside. If you've made it this far in the video, congratulations. This, in my opinion, is the coolest part of the project. So the core of what I had to modify was the camera's culling mask, which I believe just tells the camera which parts of the game to render and which ones to just ignore. I had a pretty specific vision for exactly how I wanted this to look. I wanted Link to be able to walk into any building, for the outside world to completely fade to black, have a little bit of a zoom in on Link, and to be able to choose which objects in the world stay rendered and which become invisible. But before I could think about how any of that was going to work, I needed the inside of a structure to work with, something that Link could enter and exit and have that transition happen. Pretty easy pick here, I just chose his house. I had already made the outside version of it, so I took that, cut the roof off, and I made an inside. You might be thinking, well, why are there two separate models for the inside and the outside of the same house? Well, because I have to do a bunch of rendering changes and logic as Link enters the inside and exits to the outside, it made the most sense to me to just have them as two separate things, so when I'm doing logic or programming with them, they're split apart completely. But also, now that I think about it more, I don't think with this random Voxel plugin I have that it would be possible to actually render certain parts that I choose of a voxel to be invisible and others to be visible at the same time. I just don't think that can happen. Next was the hard part. Whenever Link entered a door, I needed a trigger that would change how the camera was going to render and how it was going to work completely. This is pretty much my first attempt. I didn't really know what I was doing, and I honestly still kind of don't, but you'll see what happens next. After a few more attempts, I got the camera to choose what it was going to mask, and I figured out how to fade certain things out to black. This, combined with a small zoom and FOV change, if you will, when Link enters a building, pretty much achieved the exact effect I wanted. I am so stoked about this one. I am nerding out about it. It looks perfect. Aside from this, there are a few other things that I did do, but I think it's time to end part 1 now. Yeah, originally this wasn't meant to be a multi-parter, but we're at about the same length of video as the last one, with multiple features I was thinking about not done yet. I'm not really sure what to do next. I mean, stay engaged, comment what you want to see. I will keep working my best to get these out faster. It's really fun to work on these projects and see all the comments and all the compliments and insults and arguments, and it's great. It's just like a little community, and that's pretty much really all I want. I'm really excited to keep working on these and projects like this and share it with you all. Beyond that, who knows what's gonna happen. Maybe I'll see you in the next one. Bye. Bye.